first. I'm another forester, funnily enough. That's my background. But I'm here today with a hat on of having been involved in a lot of community gardening projects over the years, both in my own community of Powis and in surrounding ones like Sunnybank and Meadowfield. I'll just see if I can share my screen here. Here we go. So Alison asked if I could talk about some of the different elements that go into a community garden and how to think about putting them together. And these are three principles here that I'd like to think about: diversity, rooms, and connections. Three things to think about before you start your community garden. What I mean by diversity in this set case is diversity of uses of the community garden. So basically having a lot of different things going on in the garden. We like to talk about the community, but really there's no such thing. In any area, there'll be a lot of communities and a lot of people disconnected from any community as well. And you'll find that if you try one method of outreach, of consultation, etc., you'll get a community. And you'll then find if you try another, you'll get another community. And it's the same with uses in a park, community park or community garden. You really want as many different uses, attracting as many different communities as you possibly can. A couple of reasons for this. One is kind of simple fairness. If you've got stewardship of a piece of community land, it's only fair to try and make it useful for as many people in the community as you can. The other side of it is the more people you can attract to a space, the safer it is. A lot of bits of ground made available for community gardens often have issues. They've often been abandoned in the past sometimes. And they kind of have issues with vandalism and antisocial use and so on. And the best cure for illegitimate use is legitimate use. So attracting as many legitimate users to your site at as many different times as possible. And what you'll find is if you just have one user group, if you only have parents and toddlers, say, there'll be a kind of characteristic set of times that they use the site at, and at times it will be abandoned. So the more people you can draw in, the fuller use you have of your site. Second principle is rooms, and I think it's good to think of a garden in terms of being a series of rooms with connections between them. And this is because if, in terms of fitting these different uses together, Neil was talking in his talk about having mountain bikers really keen to do mountain biking in a forest, but then you've got people trying to walk on paths and so on. You have to fit these different uses together, and you have to have them not too much on top of each other. And if you can kind of segregate them a little bit into different rooms within the area, you both get less conflict, and you get more of a feeling when people are using that space that they have the space to themselves. We want as many people using the space as possible, but people actually often quite like the feeling of a little bit of solitude in public space. So this is one way to give them it. And then once you've got that, you've got to think about connections, and you need to think about connections both within and without the site. So you need to make sure that the site is well connected with lots of good round walks. If you can only walk to one end and back, that's much less interesting than if you can walk around a whole series of rooms. And also people, you'll get a lot more users in your park if people are able to walk through it on their ways to other places, if they can sort of include it in a walk that has another purpose. So just going on to how this looks in practice. This is a map of Manor Park in Middlefield. I don't really want you to look at the detail here. I just want you to look at the overall structure of it. You'll see the rooms there, and then you'll see a whole series of round walks, and you'll see connections to the wider community in all the different corners. There are ways in and out of the space, and people walking through it. And some of these through walks take you down to bus stops, some of them take you to other green spaces, some of them are ways to school and so on. So you need to plan as many of those as you can in. And this is how it actually looks as a satellite picture stolen from Google Maps. And again, you can see the sort of series of rooms and connections there, I think. This is in Sunnybank Park, and this is planning in right from the start. This is how it looked when we started. And the first thing we did was we looked at all the barriers in the park, of which there were very many. So essentially, it was already a series of rooms, but they were all locked rooms. The previous management, when the community took this over, had been very much about stopping movement between different parts of the park, keeping people controlled and in their place. But we also mapped the ways that people were actually going. These are called desire lines. If you look at the paths that people's feet are making, or if you go down when it's snowing and look at the paths that people spontaneously make, there was a whole network of paths of where people actually wanted to go. And it kind of connected up all these areas into a series of round walks. So we then incorporated that into the final plans for the park. And again, you'll see there are round walks here, and there are ways through the park as well. And this is the kind of final map of what the park looks like now. And we've tried to emphasize in this map the different throughways as well, and the different communities that gets you to. So some of the elements of a community garden now, and I'll have to kind of really canter through these. But one of those is spaces. This is a meadow at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. But there are so many different kinds of space you can have in a community garden. And the point I really want to make is they all have a use. They're all good in their way. And you need to think of this as your kind of palette with which you design your space. You don't want to have all of anything. You want to have a diversity again of different kinds of space with different kinds of vegetation growing in it. You want the gradient from tidy to wild. You want different kinds of natural environments. You want different kinds of built environment within it. This is some of those different spaces working together in Manor Park. So you're looking from one of the wilder bits where kids like to build dens and all that sort of thing, to a bit of mown grass, and there's some picnic tables just around the corner next to that, to a perennial flower bed, which gives you a big mass of colour for a lot of the year. This is another thing you can use. Earthworks is a great way of defining spaces that is utterly vandal proof and pretty low maintenance once it's in. And when you're putting it in, it's a great project for a group to do. Paths, your ways of connecting things together. This is Manor Park here again in this picture. And again, you need to think about what your different paths are doing. You want a mix of high intensity paths which are paved and going to take a lot of use, to a network of natural paths that people can wander around the site as a whole on. And as I was saying before, to think about both round walks and through walks with the paths. Then seating, and I think nothing kind of invites people into a space to spend time in it better than some seating. And just to think about the different kinds of seating again, and yet again, a mix of these is what I would encourage. Think of some solitary seating. Some people, again, go to a park, a green space to sit on their own and think, or whatever. And if someone else is on a bench, they won't sit at it. So if your only benches are shared ones, then there'll be a group of people who won't make very good use of it. Equally, you want some benches which are for social use, which are for a whole group of people sitting down and chatting together. And another class I came across just recently, the happy to chat bench. I think this is a brilliant idea. You put a sign like this on a bench, which says to people that a person sitting here is happy to chat. And it's a way of fostering connections between people and in your community, because, you know, we're in Aberdeen, we're a bit reserved. We don't generally do that. I come from closer to Glasgow, and someone sits on a bench next to you, they start talking to you, but it doesn't happen up here. So we need happy to chat benches. And here's an area of seating in Powis, again, just sort of showing some of these different things. You're incorporating some artwork. There's a chainsaw sculpture of a crocodile there, which you can also sit on. I think multifunctional things like that are great. And it's a nice social space here. Folk can sit in a circle and have a blather. Then play. Play for all ages, and I'll include sport in here. Bear in mind that you have play for different ages, and again, try to make provision for those different ages. Don't realize suddenly you've only put in play for one age. But you don't necessarily need to segregate this too much. I went a wee while ago on a tour organised by Grounds for Learning, who do school grounds. And it turned out that one of the school grounds that we're going to was my old school in a wee village in the Central Belt. And it was brilliant because they completely reorganised it. And one thing they'd done was, we used to have the wee ones playground and the big ones playground, and woe betide you if you went over the line between them, because naturally the big ones would sort of walk all over the wee ones, so they had to be kept segregated. What they'd done was put them all together in one, and they found out what the big ones did was they looked after the wee ones because they were their brothers and sisters. So when you're planning play, don't plan it in isolation. Plan some seating for parents, so the parents can sit and have a blather while their kids are playing, and put in stuff for all ages. Also, just don't just think of play equipment. Definitely think as much as you can of loose materials and imaginative play. And there's a terrible tendency to tidy all this sort of stuff away, usually on health and safety grounds, but it's actually what kids enjoy most. We had a big pile of wood chip delivered at one point for spreading on the paths at Manor Park. And I tell you, it was the most popular play feature in the park because we'd come down with toy diggers and stuff and shift all the wood chip around. I also remember another time we put in at great expense a great big climbing net. And I remember working weeding one day in one of the flower beds, and a family came in, and the kids came running into the park, cheering, ran straight past this climbing frame and up the trees. So don't forget the value of natural play, and don't design it all out of your space. I mentioned exercise equipment, adult exercise equipment and outdoor gyms. We've got some of this in Sunnybank Park, and it's become hugely more popular with the pandemic. People have really realized the value of this, and it's become really well used. It's something we'd like to expand. And then you can think about sports pitches and equipment. And what I'd say here is keep them small. Because sports pitches can easily just completely dominate a green space. And I think it's usually worse sign of lack of imagination when the whole green space is just tiled with sports pitches. But also, sports are a lot more fun on a small pitch. If you ever played as a kid and you were the one that always got stuck in goals, and you're in a massive big area, you never actually see most of the action. A small space involves more people for sports pitches. Art is a hugely important thing to include for a number of reasons. Always make sure your art does things in the space. It can be used to add interest, it can be combined with play. An artwork can define a space within a garden, or it can be used to lead people around the garden. I'll come to what I'm talking about there in a second. And it's a great way to involve people in a space. So here is an artwork that's also a play feature and also involves people, because this was made with the parents in Middlefield. It's half a ton rock and some tires painted as an essay, and kids love sort of bouncing along this or running around it. And these are some brass sculptures we did, quite small. The white is because I took some pictures of them in frost, looking very good. But what we did with these was we scattered them around Manor Park, and not necessarily very obvious, almost a bit hidden. And so people would have to go around and look for them. And it's another way to get people to explore the space and connect the different spaces together. This is doing work as a sign, but it was also carved in a carving workshop by the local youth in Manor. A Zen garden in Manor. Great thing about this is you can redo it on a regular basis, so it's always something a bit new. In terms of arranging things, what I definitely would not ever do again was put this next to a seating area where folks sit and drink, because the amount of broken glass I always had to clear out of this was horrendous. This is a graffiti wall in Sunnybank Park, and we've had some amazingly creative stuff appear on this wall. It harnesses a community that's usually seen as antisocial, and gives it a niche in the park to the benefit of the park overall. This was painted over not long after it appeared, which broke my heart, but it's in the nature of graffiti art, is it's ephemeral, and there's always something new appearing here. This is art involving people. This was the Smithfield Old Folks group that made these copper etchings, which were then put on posts and used to define a path within the park. Another element, nature. Nature's, don't forget, we're not the only users, the only species using green space. Great thing to put in things for other species. And also it's another thing that adds interest to a park. So you can put up bird and bat boxes. You can use logs as play features, as ways of defining space, as so many different things. But as they break down and provide deadwood, they're a great habitat too. Even a little bit of water in your space is great for wildlife. Flowering plants, try to plan a succession of them through the year for pollinators. And I've put leave the leaves. In general, try not to be too tidy. To this, tidying up is the great enemy really of nature in green spaces. Leave at least a few spaces where you can leave the fallen leaves, where you can leave deadwood, where you can leave natural processes to happen. The wildlife will thank you for it. This is some of the wildlife seen in Manor Park. We had a wee pond and hedgehog was spotted at it. And finally, food. This is planting up a planter with herbs in Sunnybank Park. And again, you can put food into green spaces in a lot of different ways. You can provide allotments, which gives a relatively small number of people a very strong connection to a space. And often that gives you a user group that will then do lots of other things in the park and be an asset. Or you can do community food growing that's open to everyone. And what I'd suggest for this is that perennial food growing, where it takes some work to pick things like raspberries, plums and such like, fits a community project much better than things like cabbages or ties, where it takes a lot of work to maintain, but then it's very easy for one person to harvest overnight. Perennial food's also very good for, again, leading people around a space. You can plant bushes and whatnot in different parts of a space. You can do composting in a green space. I think John will talk about that in a minute. And you can bring it all together in the idea of forest gardens. I think food is another great way of making connections in green spaces. This is an Italian lady I met in Manor Park out picking brambles to make bramble jam, which I also do. So we had a great blether. And I learned she'd come over to Scotland as a war bride after the war. So that was an amazing connection to make there. One of my neighbour's kids in my allotment, my plum tree. And I mentioned forest gardening. I don't really have time to go into it, I think, so I'll just put my blog up there about it if anyone wants to know anything more about it. And I'll finish there.